My name is Howard Holton. I'm the Global Director of Enterprise Architecture. I work under the Office of the CTO. It's a new division that was created 9 months ago. Hitachi recognized, like many other of our competitors, we spend entirely too much time talking about product. And I don't know about you, but I don't care about product. I haven't cared about product in a long time. What I care about is, how can my business be better with the changing role of IT and IT's new role as a business partner and a value creator. I don't need to care so much about the products. I need to care about what they can do for me. And the faster we can have that conversation, the more ready I am to move forward in my business and get my job done, which is not to buy products. So interesting statistic, by 2022, it's estimated that every human being will generate 1.7 megabytes of data a minute. So I just bought a brand new 256 gig iPhone. It'll be filled up in 3 months, according to that estimate. Just to kind of bring the kind of volume down to something we can all see, right? And when I talk about data, I talk about not the 3 V's, but the 4 V's, right? There's volume, velocity, and variety, but the goal is supposed to be value. So we need to not ignore the 4th V. So a little bit about my background. I've got 10 years legal experience. I was the CIO of a legal services company and took it from startup to a top 50 legal services firm. When Steve talks about radioactive data, I had 1,200 cases, all of which contained radioactive data, which was the reason they became litigated. I'm a compliance and licensing consultant, HIPAA and SOX trainer, and I spend most of my time at Hitachi as a tech evangelist, really focused on strategic IT. Right? Like I said, the goal of IT has changed. It used to be that we were custodians of blinky lights. Right? We got great accolades as long as the blinky lights kept blinking the way the blinky lights were supposed to blink. Right? And then we designed systems so that if this blinky light stopped, then everything moved over to this blinky light that worked. But that's not our job anymore. That's not the goal anymore. The goal now is digital transformation. So that really changes IT. My relationship with Hitachi and why I came here, I was a Hitachi reference customer for 7 years. I used HCP for the content and metadata, not as an archive. I never used it as an archive. And I was an early HCI user. And I worked with Hitachi, and Hitachi became my partner, which is really what excited me about coming here. And as we look at kind of what's happening, right, I think this is the most important message. We hear all day long about digital transformation. We hear all day long, and I just said it, about how IT is changing. And those are facts, but the fact also is it's only possible because of what we did before, right? We come from that era of getting technology to work, to that era where we got it to work, to the new era where everything was turned on its head, and we've even mostly figured that one out. It's really easy to forget past achievements. Don't, because that's the legacy we're creating. We live too much in a what have you done for me lately, but no disruption is possible without what we've already done, without the shoulders of the things that we're standing on that we did before. When we look at digital transformation, again, legal background, so I tend to be fairly pedantic. One of my biggest complaints in dealing with vendors was, fantastic, you made up a word. Congratulations. What does that word actually mean? Can you explain it to me? Right? I think we've all heard this. I think we're probably all going through this. Does anyone have a good definition for digital transformation? I got to call Steve back in. This was supposed to be interactive. I was lied to. Somebody, give me a definition of digital transformation. Anybody? I promise I won't click next until somebody gives me a definition of digital transformation. Doesn't even have to be good. Okay, go into the cloud. Anybody else? Digital transformation is a change, a focus on delivering your products in the way your customers wish to receive them. This is the definition from Gartner. And there's a good reason for this definition. And there's a reason I underlined wish. 10 years ago, all of us used taxis. Maybe only once. Maybe we only saw them on TV. But when thinking about how you would improve a taxi, was your first thought, I'm going to make it an app that tells me when the car is going to arrive, how long it's going to take, and how much it's going to cost? No, that wasn't. It was, let's use nicer cars. Cool, we've got black car, we've got limo. Let's use polite drivers. Let's maybe use a GPS instead of allow the driver to pick the directions. The true disruption was the wish. Because the fact was, the problem with the taxi cab wasn't the yellow cab. It wasn't the driver. It wasn't the directions. It was the unknown. I didn't know how much it was going to cost. I didn't know how long it was going to take me to find a car, because I either had to dial 8 on a phone until someone picked up the phone, or go stand on a corner like an idiot and go, over here, can somebody help me? Anyone, please? Which meant I didn't know when I was going to arrive. And I don't know about you, but I've never grabbed a cab where I didn't have any place to be on at a specific time. Even if it's lunch. I don't miss a lot of lunches. The disruption from Uber was specifically in changing how we received the cab, right? Into what we wished, what we didn't even know we needed. Right? Netflix, the other big disruptor. Amazon, I don't count as a big disruptor. Amazon was just a big bookstore. Right? But Netflix was the big disruptor. And their disruption wasn't giving you movies on demand. They didn't know they were going to do that. Right? Their disruption was, what was the thing that you hated about going to the video store? What did you hate about going to Blockbuster? Right? Personally, I hated missing the return window. Right? That was the thing I hated the most. Then second to that was going there right after movies got released, picking through the shelves, going, that one's gone, that one's gone, that one's gone, that one's gone, that one's gone. I guess I'm renting another rom-com. This is going to be a great night. Right? Netflix disruption was giving you the movie you wanted, letting you know when it was coming, giving you a cue just in case that one was missed, and then you don't have to worry about missing the return window. Right? We didn't need instant gratification for that. Now it's evolved to the point where they're so disruptive, they're now having to release movies to the theater because the festivals, Cannes, Sundance, are excluding them from their awards to make it competitive for the traditional studios to compete. No one knew that was going to happen. Does anyone know why they signed Adam Sandler to a 6-film deal? No. So they have perfect analytics, right? Television doesn't. Television uses, does anybody know the name of the company that television uses? Nielsen. Nielsen is terrible. They put a box in your home. They record what cable channel you're on. Like, that's what Nielsen does. They do a little survey. Netflix just records all the data. So what Netflix found was people change the way they watch. They watch television shows, series, to binge. They want deep stories. They want to be involved, and they want to be engaged. They watch movies as noise. They don't look for the engagement. And so it's a totally different view. You would think that things like The Godfather, I mean, come on, they're making such good programming, they're winning every award. Why don't they make movies like that? Because no one watches movies like that. No Netflix viewer. And so they had the analytics and they said, people watch series, right? They watch House of Cards because it's engaging and it's long and they can get involved. But they really turn on popcorn. And that's why they signed Adam Sandler to a 6-picture deal. Right? Because they know exactly what it is that they want, because the data tells them exactly what their viewer wants. So this is important. And it's all about customer centricity. It's not about market. It's about customer and changing to engage your customer. An interesting thing that we found in the last few years, I spent an awful lot of time doing research. And one of the most interesting research studies that I read is about millennials. They're the largest buying sector currently available in the market. Right? There's 5 baby boomers for every 2, whatever the hell us are, followed by 5 millennials. Right? They outnumber us 2.5 to 1. But their buying patterns are completely different than our buying patterns. Their values are completely different than our values. By ours, I mean my generation, the generations that came before. We care about houses and cars. They don't care about ownership. It's the strangest thing in the world, but they're also the most loyal buying center we've ever seen, and we have no idea why. If you grab a millennial early, they will buy from you forever as long as you don't betray their trust. And they buy the company, not the product. That's why they like Apple, because they feel Apple is an ethical company. Right? The reality of the situation may be a little different, but that's why they buy what they buy. And it's really interesting to see how the world is changing and how the market is changing. Not good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. It's changing. Right? We can talk about change in university, but in reality, we need to figure out how to adapt to change.
Is that when the move to put Apple in schools early on?
You would think that, but Apple's been doing that for decades, right? Apple got started with a 2E, and Steve Jobs' philosophy there was they were the very first computer company to do a significant cost cut for SLED. And the thought there was when the kid graduates high school, goes to college, gets out of college, and goes to get a job, they'll demand an Apple. That did not work. I think actually it has more to do with the fact that we've attained functionality parity that allows that to happen, right? And the workspace has changed, right? Our generation did that, right? And this device here, right, stopped being the kind of central requirement to your life, and you got a little bit more flexibility. But no, I mean, I'm sure it has much more to do with the ecosystem that's created with the App Store, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I've got $1,500 in apps. I'm not throwing that away to go to Android, even if I think it's a better solution. Plus, my wife would kill me because we'd lose iMessage. I don't know how many people base their personal technology decisions on those of their wives, but I'm one of them. So any other definition of this is digitizing. We do a lot of digitizing. What is our digital transformation? Well, we're going to take that thing that we did that wasn't on computers and we're going to computerize it. That's not digital transformation. Digital transformation is specifically customer-centric. It requires a company-wide focus. Digital transformation is led from IT, but is not restricted to IT. Without the company getting behind it, you're never going to transform your product to deliver it the way your customers wish to receive it. This is a clear sign of failure. You can start here, but you cannot stop here. It requires a strong CIO, and it requires company-wide change, company-wide transformation. I think I made that clear here in the third one. Without the whole organization, digital transformation will fail. So this is key advice we give to CIOs. Strengthen your business acumen. Strengthen your business acumen. Strengthen your business acumen. Does anyone know where CIOs traditionally came from in the business? Finance. Why? Because IT was a cost center, and they want to reduce costs, right? Does that work in a digital world? Does that work in DX? Hell no. Right? So if all you understand is finance and how to cut costs, DX will fail. You must understand the business. How does your company make money, and what are you actually good at? Companies that have successfully digitally transformed, the first thing they look at is, what are we good at, and how do we productize that and get rid of everything else? Just to be honest. Right? A company that's really good at making toys doesn't have to do the logistics themselves. Right? They make success by doing what they're good at and productizing what they're good at. And a lot of companies right now are productizing the things that we do in IT. Because we're all good at it in some way. There's something that we do that is unique in IT, and productizing that is often the first step of digital transformation. Implement a technology review process. How many of you have some sort of review process whereby every application, every choice that you've made is reviewed on some sort of schedule basis? For me, we had a rule in IT, no system could exist longer than 2 years. Everything must be reviewed and everything must be rebuilt a maximum of 2 years. Could not have a lifespan longer than 2 years. Does anyone else have a policy like that? Because that's what number 2 says. We have to start challenging the things that we did yesterday to make sure they make sense for tomorrow. And we tend to not do that. Let's be honest, we tend to nap just a little bit because some of those things are sacred cows, right? Dear God, don't touch that thing, it works, and if we touch it, someone's going to yell at us. Right? That does not work in a digital world. It just doesn't. A 5-year depreciation is for hardware. Applications don't depreciate, right? My hardware life cycle, even if I stretch it, is no longer than 7 years. Anything longer than that's dangerous, right? What's my application life cycle? 10? What's my data life cycle? How many people here think about data life cycle, right? What's the lifespan of your data? When we look at having a successful data strategy, we have to throw out the traditional retention models. We have to throw out this kind of 7-year retention model, right? Because the value of the data doesn't die after 7 years. Anyone know what the retention requirements are in asbestos data? It is 5 years after the second generation dies. So if your dad worked at a building removing asbestos, you have to die plus 5 years before that data can be deleted. So from a practical standpoint, it's 135 years. That's actually not a bad thing in this world, because it means that we've got data from the 70s that we can actually see if there's any other value in. Now, the downside to that is lawyers want it all deleted within 30 days. 30 days from creation, they'd love it all to be deleted, because evidence isn't evidence if we delete it according to policy. If we're not aware of it, and we delete it according to policy, and 3 months later somebody says, hey, there's evidence there. Sorry, we have a policy. We're totally fine. Punitive damages go away. We're not deleting evidence. Build and execute. I really want to be specific here. People are the biggest problem. People will be the biggest problem. None of us in the room have the smartest data scientists working for us. We're Hitachi, we're fairly big. Hitachi Limited has 400,000 employees. Hitachi Limited doesn't have the best data scientists. The best data scientists live in the Bay Area. Starting pay for a top data scientist from a top school is $250,000 a year. The best guys are making $1 million, $1.5 million a year after you figure stock options. Can anyone else afford $350,000 for 2 years experience with a data scientist? I can't. Right? We don't have them. We have to figure out how to create them. We have to start building citizen data scientists. We have to figure out how to take the things that we do today and turn those into the skills of tomorrow. We've made a promise to every employee we hired, haven't we? That you'll have a future here, that there is a growth opportunity. How many people are doing that today? How many people have seen their company come out with a new training policy that really looks for the future, that's blunt and says, by 2019, we need 10 more data scientists. These are the skills a data scientist has to have. Click here to get those skills. Well, we're a reactive society. We talk about proactive in IT all the time. How proactive are our companies? Without talking even about our companies, how much proactivity do you see in the market? How many 40-year-old companies do you see that are truly being proactive in all these areas? It's hard to do. It's very, very hard to do, right? If no one's read the book, Who Moved My Cheese, it's probably a good time to start reading that. Read it. It's your career, read it. Sponsor innovation across the company through development of innovation labs. How many of your companies have innovation labs? Digital transformation requires an innovation lab. Where are you going to put it otherwise? How do you encourage the employees that understand the operations of the business and probably have really good ideas? How do you encourage them to talk to the technologists? This is the most critical thing on the board. Take this back to your companies. Talk to them about doing this. It's really, really important. Right? The reason we haven't digitally transformed before is not actually because we lack the capabilities. It's because IT and the business couldn't be further apart. How many times has someone from the business come to you and just with something simple, even just an Excel spreadsheet that they're working on and gone, man, I really wish you could do this. And you go, yeah, it's like 3 clicks, click, click, click. And they go, oh my God, you just changed my job. It has to happen to each of us once in our careers, right? That's all digital transformation is. How many times does the business come to us and say, I wish technology could solve this problem, whatever it happens to be? And we go, oh yeah, we didn't know you needed that. That's what an innovation lab is specifically for. That's the value of an innovation lab. Without that, it's entirely too passive an action. I don't think we'd be here if it wasn't for shadow IT. Right? As a CIO, that was my most hated thing, but I don't think we'd be here without shadow IT. I think shadow IT was the wake-up call to us not servicing the business. Right? And I think now that's moving. I think in very good companies, right? Not Uber, not startups that are built around this new economy, but I think in very good traditional companies, I think it's still 75-25. It's going to be very, very, very hard to digitally transform if you've outsourced IT. If you've exited the tribal knowledge about how the operating systems that, and I don't mean the OSs, I mean the technology that operates the business. If you've taken that tribal knowledge and moved it someplace else because it was cheaper, it's going to be very, very, very hard to digitally transform without that knowledge. A lot of those organizations don't have a true CIO. Right? And they really need to start thinking about it, because disruption's not something that's just for the whales. It's not something that's just for the enterprise. Right? The SMB and mid-market has the ability to be more agile. Right? Agility is the name of the game. And disruption exists everywhere. But like I said, right? I don't buy products. Yeah. I haven't bought products in years. I buy outcomes. How are you going to help me achieve my goal? And my goal is not blinky lights anymore. The tribal knowledge, the value of the tribal knowledge is not being able to click the buttons that keep the infrastructure running. Correct. It's about knowing why the infrastructure is running in the first place. So like I said, figure out what your company does good and do that, which means I don't need to pay people to run my Windows operating system. I don't need to pay people to run VMware. I need to pay people to understand what the value is that application brings. What's the data that's collected? How do I gain value out of that data? I mean, that's why the cloud exists the way that it does, because it focuses my attention on the thing that my business makes money at, even if it doesn't make money yet. The distance between invention and innovation. I was talking about this the other day. The most innovative company, and it may have changed, but the most innovative company for a long time was Apple. right? I mean, you could say the 2000s. For sure, Apple was the most innovative company. They were not the most inventive company. When we look back, like Bell Labs, hugely inventive. They invented the mouse, they invented the GUI. They didn't innovate with it, right? The distance between invention and innovation is huge. And that distance has grown further apart, not closer together. When we look back at the 60s and 70s, that was the wild, wild west. The distance between invention and innovation, they were right next door to each other. It was as far from that door to that door. Today, it's Phoenix to New York, right? Why? Because all the heavy lifting is done, right? All the easy to pick fruit, all the low-hanging fruit has already been picked. Right? This stuff is hard. And when we look at data science, right, where we're trying to find the innovation, there's a ton of invention. Blockchain's a really good example. Ton of invention. It's got the potential to be a world-changing technology. But innovation is turning that into value. How many companies have successfully turned that into value? And the answer today is zero. Right? I mean, Bitcoin and having a valuation is not really turning that into value. Right? The most promising projects we currently have around blockchain to turn that into true value is logistics. There's tremendous value in logistics. No one's made any money at it yet. They're spending billions of dollars hoping that that innovation turns into value. It is very, very, very hard. And the hardest thing with data science today is the question. A data scientist will take any question you ask and give you an answer based on the data you have. Right? We're supposed to base our corporate strategy off of the answers to the data science questions. Anybody disagree with that statement? Right? We're using data analytics and data science to build our strategic direction for the future. Right? We're sailing to the new world. We're leaving the shores of Europe on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They had a bit of a data science problem. They were trying to find a faster route to India. Now, they lucked out and they found a fertile world where they could literally pick gold up off the ground. But that aside, if you're basing the strategy for your future, and every one of your competitors is doing exactly the same thing and trying to disrupt the market that you exist in, what does 15% off cost you? What does asking the wrong question cost you? The question's the hard part, not the answer. The data will always tell you the answer. Right? And that becomes really, really hard when the low-hanging fruit's gone. Look at Uber versus Lyft. Has anyone been following what Uber's expected valuation is at IPO? 160. 160. Now, I personally think that's absolute lunacy, right? A company that owns no assets, not a single car, is worth more than the big five automakers combined, right? All the automakers minus Tesla, they're worth more than. They're worth more than all of the big five airline companies combined. That's a crazy valuation. Does anyone know what Lyft's valuation is? 9. Uber got there first. Uber's mission is significantly different than Lyft's. Does anyone know what Uber's mission actually is? What the goal was with the taxi disruption? Because it wasn't actually to put a car at your house. It was to figure out how quickly he could get a car to anyone in America. Just America, that's all he started with. He said, we answered that at 7 minutes. On average, we can get a car to anyone in America in 7 minutes. Now the question is, what will you pay to have delivered in 7 minutes? And that is a hugely different question than enjoy your taxi. People are using Uber instead of ambulances because it's far cheaper. I'm a pretty nerdy guy. You can probably tell by the conversation, right? I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about, anything else. I recently got into football. I moved to Colorado. We've got the Denver Broncos. My boss at the time said, hey, I'm taking all the management team to the Broncos. Do you want to go? I know you're not a football fan. Please say no, the tickets are expensive. And I said, yes, I've never been to a live football game. So we got great seats, bottom level. It was Broncos Raiders. I've had interactions with Raiders fans, so I don't like the Raiders at all. And 3 of the first 4 plays, Peyton Manning pulled the Raiders defense offsides. I was stunned. I didn't realize there was so much strategy in this game. I thought it was just chaos. It's my fault, right? I was completely ignorant. I was also hooked. I did not leave my seat for the duration of the game. Literally, did not leave during halftime. I had no idea how long that was going to last. I didn't want to get up and go to the bathroom and miss a play. I didn't know it was 15 minutes. I don't know. What are we doing now? It's halftime. Do you want something to drink? Yeah. Do you need to go to the bathroom or something? No, I'm good. Go. In the 5 years I've lived in Colorado, I've been to 30 live games, and I got lucky enough to go to Super Bowl 50. Trip of a lifetime. It was absolutely fantastic. We sat in the worst seats you could possibly imagine, all the way up at the top. I was still thrilled and excited. After it was done, we wanted to get an Uber back to our hotel. The Uber line was 2.5 miles from the stadium, and they did a fantastic job. Uber this way, little arrow. Uber this way, little arrow. And just kind of like lemmings, we followed the piper, right? Only to see the Uber line, which was over 4 hours long to get an Uber. And it's a constant stream of cars pulling into the parking lot, right? You wait, the guy tells you, okay, you can request your Uber, you hit the Uber, the next guy clicks the accept button, you get in the car and leave, right? So we're like, okay, well, our hotel is only another 4 miles away. At this point, we might as well walk. And I went, I got this coupon for Lyft. Pulled out my phone, and again, right, the Uber parking lot's here, and there's this big line of cars pulling in. I pull out my phone, I install the Lyft app, I type in the coupon code, I put in the address, and I click Lyft, and I see right there, 4th car, pink lips. Bing! Guy calls me, I go, yep, we're right here. We're waving, I see your pink lips. He makes a U-turn, picks us up, and we're at the hotel in 5 minutes. That's a fantastic interaction. I use Lyft for one thing. I use Lyft to schedule a car to get me to the airport in the morning. Otherwise, I still use Uber. Southeast Asia, anyone been to Southeast Asia? They don't have an Uber in Southeast Asia. Uber got their ass kicked. They use Curb. I think it's Curb, right? Or is it Dash? Or I want to say it's Curb. But the Southeast Asia version of Uber, the company that kicked Uber out, has a higher valuation than Lyft, which I find to be really interesting. So again, right? Advice, vision, selling internal capabilities as products provides a compelling reason and approach to go digital. Figure out which company does good. And since it tends to start in IT, right? Effort. Less than 10% of companies are doing true digital transformation. 90% of companies that claim to be digitally transforming are digitizing. And practicality. Identify customers and markets that benefit from your data and algorithms, and consider a techquisition. This is the first era, right? The focus was on the technology itself and figuring out this new world. The second one was building processes around it. We all remember going through that, right? That was the ITIL. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of ITIL in the current market. We need to be a lot more agile than ITIL allows us to be, but it was a good place to be, right? We did IT management, service management. We treated colleagues as customers if we were smart, right? Everybody has a customer, and we're always selling something. Always. Right? Identifying your customer is really important. Those of us that did that in phase 2, we've become better at it for phase 3. Now we move these customers to the center of our lives, to the center of what we do. We're not just delivering to customers, we're delivering what customers wish they had. Delivering our products in the way they wish they could receive them. The focus was on technology, then it was on process, now it's on enabling the business. It must be on enabling the business. It must be on enabling the business. The focus of everyone must be on how does a business make money and how do we help make more of it? Where should we be making money that we're not making money today? Has anyone watched the documentary series on Netflix, the 70s, 80s, and 90s? It's 8 episodes per decade. Each episode is an hour long, and each episode deals with a different facet of the decade. Not a year. I really love the way it's organized. You can skip the things you're not interested if you really want. But what you talked about is the saving and loan scandal of the 80s. Right? What you talked about is the crash of 2008. Everyone is well aware of the housing crash of 2008, right? This isn't news to anyone. And we know subprime mortgages. And do you know how that occurred? Why that occurred? So there's a gentleman named Hung who created an algorithm. And what the algorithm essentially did was provide the mathematics necessary to take poorly rated securities and using an algorithm, bundle them based on their rating to give them a higher rating. The theory being, even if I take a bunch of Fs, if I aggregate against enough Fs, my risk actually moves up because they're not all going to default at the same time. If I take a bunch of Ds, which include now a bunch of Fs, and I bundle them together sufficiently, I get Cs, Bs, As, AAs, and AAAs. We're all Is everyone aware that that's how that occurred? Does anyone know what that algorithm was actually created for? That algorithm was created to retroactively look at markets and find recessions that we didn't previously know were recessions. That's what that algorithm was created for. In his paper, he specifically wrote about this is a historical analysis algorithm to look for evidence of recession where we didn't know it was a recession before, because recessions are very, very, very hard to identify. Right? And we spend a lot of time in economics trying to figure out what state are we in. Depressions are very easy to identify. Recessions are very, very hard to identify. Slowing of economies. The faster and better we get at predicting a recession, the better we will be at holding off a depression. Right? It's the same thing treating a flu. The faster I can treat it on this end, the less bad the symptoms will be, and maybe I won't be out of work for 3 weeks while I deal with pneumonia, right? To apply that in the real world is great, and it works great until you hit a recession, which is exactly what happened. Then the model is specifically expected to fail because that's the predictor in the model of a recession. So we need to pay attention to risk. We don't need to be risk adverse. We need to be risk aware. So key to DX, products, not projects. A project has a series of milestones, and then guess what? It's over. It's over, it's complete, it's done. And then we move on to the next project, right? Yeah, that's the way that works. But a product isn't done that way. We deliver an MVP with a product. Then we iterate from there. Is everyone familiar with the agile methodology? It's about as deep as we need to go into it. Right? My philosophy is that's the company, not IT. And this is the company, not IT. Right? This presentation is my MVP. I will then continue to iterate on it forever. It will not go into a box and die. We need to start thinking about that. Projects cannot be agile by very definition. No more projects. Everything must become a product. That's a very, very hard thing to do. Because that means they have a life cycle. That means some percentage of human cycles have to be devoted to maintaining a product. It's a very hard thing to do, but really, really, really critical. How can we react to our customers and the changing demands of our customers and the evolving demands of our customers if it's a project? It's delivered, it's done. No wonder they fail. Right? Hitachi did this a few years ago. Luckily, I wasn't there. They looked at one of our financial systems, and they did a whole bunch of research, and they came back with this list of like 700 features, and they hired a third-party company, and they programmed in all 700 features, which turned into 7 cascading menus. Not a single workflow, no tutorial on how to use it. Everything was buried in a menu. Why? Well, because you said you had to have that feature, and it was a mandatory feature, so we just added that feature. Cool. So this is version 1, right? We can think about the thing we did that was stupid here and maybe fix that. Oh, no, it's a project, it's done. How many systems internally to your company are that way? God, if we could only go back and revisit this thing, we could improve it and we could actually get some value out of it. Faster, better, more customer oriented. Fail fast, fail fast, fail fast, fail fast, fail fast. The faster we fail, the faster we're going to find the big success. Don't be afraid of failure. What's big data? Brings up a very valid point, very good point. What's big data? I asked what the definition of digital transformation is. Someone give me a definition of big data. Is it big because of volume? Is that why we call it big data? It's variety. It's variety. Of the 3 V's, big data is variety. It happens to also have volume, but if I've got 3 petabytes of Oracle RDBMS data, that is not big data. That's just a big Oracle instance. Big data didn't exist because data warehouses were terrible. Big data existed because data warehouses don't contain the data that I need to answer the damn question. A very early data science experiment that I quite love was there was a company, doesn't matter, they produce a widget, doesn't matter what the widget is. Their sales, they count a sale when the product is shipped in accounting. 3rd quarter their sales always dipped and they had no idea why. Customer demand wasn't low. They had the same number of orders, they just weren't getting the products out. And they didn't know why. So they took all their different data sources and they kind of put them together and they looked, and what they found was the cheapest part that they put, which was a $2.26 little widget thing, right? Little component. They just couldn't get enough supply. Okay, is it a logistics problem? Are the trucks not working? No. They buy it from a company that produces it in India, and there's a festival that occurs for the entire month of October, so the factory's shut down. They're just not producing the widget. They buy 100% of what the factory can produce up to that point. They're the only ones that they buy from, and they're the only company that buys that widget. They can't make any more. They don't have any more production line. There's a company in Canada that they were looking at initially before they went to India, and the cost for the widget is 10 times what the cost for the widget is in India. It's a 26-cent widget. So their solution was simple. We just, in third quarter, we buy a ton of that widget from the company in Canada to get us through fourth quarter, and all of a sudden their sales went up by 15% because they were able to ship the units that they were behind. That didn't exist without the logistics data. That didn't exist without the production data. That didn't exist without a calendar. It's all about the variety. How many times have we heard a data science story that talks about the weather effect? Nobody has that in their database. It's not part of your Oracle, right? It's all about variety. Without variety, you can't answer a question that truly has value. And frankly, if you can answer the question without variety, you don't need data science for it. You should have been doing it already. The data already exists within holistically within your environment, right? Data marts exist because the really hard questions don't exist in your own data set. If you ever want to play with some interesting data sets, data.world is a great place to start. Data.world, it's all free data sets. Data.world, it's great. Product centricity means adapting an agile delivery methodology rather than delivering a completed project. No single activity that is delivered and then abandoned. So we just talked about this. It's big. It's not big because of its volume. It's big because of its variety. We are able to use analytics to answer questions because the answer is hidden in the links of disparate data sources. So when we look at data analytics, we've got some priorities here, right? We need to share the data. We need to combine the data. We need to process it for analytics and AI. We need to address the data privacy risks and secure the legal right. We've all heard of GDPR. Is anyone subject to GDPR in the room? Do you know what consent is as defined by GDPR? Consent is the most difficult. So there's three data classifications as it is regarding to consent. There is implied, contractual, and then consent required. I use a bank as the example here, but essentially the first one, we'll do the easy one first, which is contractual. For you to have a credit card, contractually, I need to be able to keep certain pieces of data. What's your credit limit? List your transactions. What's your credit card number? Those are really the contractual pieces. The stuff immediately related to the credit card, the product that I'm providing to you. Now, there's also the implied, and that's generally the stuff that's identifiable to you. Your name, your address, your social security number, maybe your mother's maiden name, your phone number. Right? The things that allow me to get in contact with you and verify you are the person you say you are. It is implied that to provide you a credit card, I have to have that information about you. Okay? I can use those for those purposes. Right? Any other purpose or any other data requires implicit consent, not implied consent. Implicit consent. Also, May 25th, 2018 is the day that went into effect. Right? It was published a year before, so May 25th, 2017 was the first date that was published, right, as it is ratified. There's no grandfather clause. If you do not collect consent on the data you had or have, you cannot use it for anything other than implied or contractual. You cannot retroactively gain consent for data you previously collected. Anyone aware of that? I have seen almost no companies that have done consent correctly. The little cookie notification that you now get that you're forced to click on, that is not implied consent because they don't tell me how they're going to use the data. By law, they have to tell me how to use the data. For the consent to be valid, they have to prove that I knew how they were going to use the data. So it hasn't had its day in court. There's going to be thousands, tens of thousands of lawsuits. It hasn't had its day in court, and the European Commission agreed to do no fines before November 15th. So now we're going to start to see the output from this. I expect the first bunch of fines to be relatively low unless the violation is truly egregious. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but it is egregious is the important word. So those of you with cameras, this is the most important slide that I have now that we're talking about compliance. Does anyone understand? No, sorry, this is a record of authority. I need to clean my glasses. So when we look at priorities for big data, right, and we look at data quality, a record of authority starts to become really, really important. How do I know that that is the authoritative version of that data, right, all of my data? How do I know that that my data quality rules have been applied? How do I know that my governance has been applied? How do I know all of those things? So we need to start thinking about a record of authority. How do I store that? How do I keep that? How do I hold that? That's all a record of authority is. Every piece of data should have an identified record of authority. And that is a place, not a record. It is a place, right? What place is that data authoritative? We call that digital vault. In the digital vault, your most valuable asset, your data, is pristine, protected, and always available, and ready to extract maximum value. That's about as close as I get to product discussion in my slideshow. I had to throw something in there or sales would never invite me back. So let's talk about GDPR for a minute. Let's talk about compliance. Let's talk about governance. So compliance is the method by which policies are executed, enforced, and reported. That is the definition of compliance. It is nothing more than that. Governance is adding a third party to compliance. Governance is the execution, reporting, and response of any policy mandated by a third party. That is governance. You are governed externally, not internally. We often get these confused. It is important to understand the difference. This is the slide that is the most important slide. If you're taking pictures, take a picture of this slide. The reason for this slide: legal requirements are bound to a reasonability clause. What is reasonable to expect someone to do in a similar situation? This is what attorneys argue, civil specifically. This is what attorneys argue all the time. This is their job. What is reasonable? No, judge, we didn't do that because it would have cost $80 million to protect $4 million in liability. It is not reasonable for us to take that action. This is risk assessment. When you're talking to legal, when legal says, no, you can't do that, this is the argument you use with legal. This is the discussion you use with legal. We're doing it this way because this is what's reasonable. We know this is reasonable because we did our research and this is what our competition is doing. We're not Google. We don't have an unlimited budget. The law for HIPAA, as written, says healthcare providers must do what's reasonable to protect their customer data. The problem is when they get too vague, then we fight about what's reasonable. But you have to understand this because so many times in data analytics we're told we can't do something. Understanding reasonability allows you to have a conversation that legal understands. They don't care about technology. I always said the three least technical portions of the population in order are lawyers, judges, and I have a great story about that. I'm called onto the stand to testify as an expert witness. I give my testimony of the events as they occurred as an expert, right, doing an analysis. The prosecution immediately says, and this is a criminal trial, the prosecution immediately says, the prosecution would like to move for perjury charges against the defendant. That stops everything when that happens, by the way. It's not like it happens on TV. That literally stops all proceedings. And the judge then needs to find the testimony that they're specifically referring to where the defendant lied. That's what perjury is. It's just a lie. Okay, now, he has a laptop, and all he has to do is go like this and scroll. He can't figure it out. He can't figure out how to find that testimony. He can't do a control F. He doesn't know, just can't do it. Court reporter gets up and tries to help him. She can't figure it out. The bailiff tries to help him. He can't figure it out. The solution is we're going to call in IT to figure out how to scroll. I'm not legally allowed to help him. They have to excuse me and the jury for an hour to call in IT so IT can go, your computer's not working. Yeah, I can't. I need to find previous testimony. All right, it broke? It crashed? No. How do I find previous testimony? You mean like this? So that's the second least technical. If that's the second least technical, then the first is scary. And the first is the 12 people that couldn't get out of jury duty. There's a reason experts lose cases. It's because we tend to, even when we're trying to dumb it down, we tend to explain it in too high a level for those groups to understand. So this is important. And it's important for two reasons. One, if you understand reasonability, now you can talk the way your customer, legal in this case, wishes to hear it, right? And how they understand it. But two, legal is the most loyal buying center you will ever find. They're not interested in technology. If it delivers the bare minimum, they're your MVP right there. If it delivers the bare minimum of what they need, and you roughly improve it, they will buy it and own it forever. And in a company, what legal says goes. If legal says we're doing it this way, they're doing it that way. You can either react to legal coming to you and saying, this is our new governance policy, this is what we're doing, or you can be proactive, right? And you can say, hey, this is coming out, this is what's happening, this is what the world sees, this is what the world says. We now need to do this is how IT would like to handle it. We feel this is reasonable because this is what our competition is doing. this is the technology that's available, this is whatever, does that work for you? And they will, 90% of the time, they will say, sure, how are you going to report on it? Okay, we're going to give you the following reports because this is what the regulation requires. Fantastic, we're all good. I'll happily sign off on that. They don't want to spend their time doing this. And consent is 90% of what you're going to get hit by. It's too hard to do and it's easy to violate. You don't have to delete the data, but you cannot use it for any purpose other than contractual or implied. If you're not using the data, you're not technically in violation. There's no timeline on right to be forgotten. It has to be reasonable. Well, no one's defined reasonable yet. Hasn't seen a stay in court. 6 months, probably still reasonable on a right to be forgotten. To be honest, today in this day and age, 6 months is probably reasonable. Right for remediation, probably less than 6 months. Let's say 3 months. That would be a good watermark. Data export, right to data portability. 6 months is probably still good. Also, please do note, none of those expire. There is no expiration. If I was a European resident, a resident of the EU, and it's EU resident, not EU citizen, expats that live in the EU, they have the same rights. Europeans, citizens that live here in the US, they don't have any of those rights. Must be an EU resident, right? Additionally, if your company doesn't specifically market to the EU, it is not reasonable to assume, right? Frontier Airlines, as an example, right? Purely domestic, they have 0 European flights. They're not subject to the EU. They're not subject to GDPR. It would probably be wise for them to start following it because it's being photocopied. Brazil just passed their version of GDPR. I've got it on a slide here, eventually. It is literally a photocopy where they did a find and replaced European Union with Brazil. California is a photocopy. I want to say Montana and North Dakota are 2 other states that passed them, which is interesting. The only reason I can figure that they passed them is because they're used as shell states for shell companies that people create. It gives them a good ability to regulate that, which they've not had before. A request to be forgotten doesn't mean you delete all their data. If you have data that is contractual and you have data that is inferred and they're going to continue to use services, right? Part of the report you deliver back is, this is the data we've deleted. This data we haven't deleted because there's a compliance requirement. Like you bought a mortgage and that has to exist, the mortgage record has to exist 20 years after the mortgage is paid off. So there's a compliance requirement, we're keeping this data. However, that expires on this date. On that date, it will be deleted. Like I said, they don't expire. So you can document the data you're keeping. You don't have to delete everything, but you must return back to them a report that states the actions that were taken and what was not taken. And if there's a clock, you must define the clock. Does that sound complicated enough for everybody? Is everyone prepared for that? I don't know any company that is. And I don't just speak to American companies. How about a data loss event? Does anyone know how GDPR defines a data loss event? This is my favorite as an IT guy. A data loss event is anything that prevents the user from getting to the data that they need at the time they need it. That's a data loss event. Doesn't mean data was deleted. It means the customer's ability to access the data was prevented. Now, if you have no control over that, you don't have to do anything. But if a switch goes down and the system's inaccessible, even if data was not lost, that is a data loss event on the GDPR, it must be reported. Which means you must create a system to report outages to legal. Legal will always make the decision on whether that has to be reported outside the company. Within the company, you must create a system to do that. So you can tell I'm segueing into this conversation. 30 years in IT, my experience has been the most antagonistic relationship is this relationship here. And it develops mostly from a lack of understanding, right? Not understanding what each other's business is and a demand to comply, right? And traditionally IT, we kind of do what we're told. We're doing it because someone needs it. And legal comes in and says, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Now give me this, give me this, give me this, put this in place. Right? With no understanding of the ramifications. Because we don't speak the same language. So let's start there. This is the goal of legal. This is their only goal. They don't have anything else. Reduce risk and mitigate liability. Reduce risk and mitigate liability. When they go to sleep, they don't count sheep. They just repeat this mantra over and over again. Under GDPR, you are required to establish data stewards and a chief compliance officer. Those are legal requirements under GDPR. Did you know that those people can be held individually liable? There's a reason that legal gets so freaked out about this. They are officers of the court. They themselves carry liability and personally carry liability. And their only job is to reduce risk and mitigate liability. Isn't that also our job? Don't we add data protection layers? Don't we add redundancy to reduce risk and mitigate liability? The goal shouldn't be that great. The goal of IT is to enable the business to gain maximum value from their technology, strategy, and budget. This is the current goal of IT. But it's also to reduce risk and mitigate liability. It's been our job forever. We're not that far apart. So the two sides of the legal coin. Legal prepares the response to any legal request. Legal reports what was done. They report what was done, when, and by whom. IT is responsible for the execution of the action. IT does what, when, and by whom. When we look at good compliance, what would you rather defend, people or process? It's why we look at automating compliance. It's why it's so damned important to automate. Has anyone been deposed as part of their job? Have you ever had to give a deposition? Have you ever been interviewed by legal? Yeah. It was about to, right until you said that, it was about to be the luckiest group I've ever done this presentation to. That was the greatest day of your life, wasn't it? You never felt more valued as an employee, more secure in your actions as a human being, right? That is a horrible thing to happen. Well, you know what never gets deposed is an automated process. Why did we do it that way? Here's the documentation. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Right now, something that's really important. Really important. A lot of times we'll use regex to identify data. How many people write their own regex? Don't ever do it when it comes to compliance. Ever. Ever. Do a Google search. Research what other people have done. Then document wherever you found that and the reasoning why you chose that regex. It's not, the regex isn't perfect. It's very seldom that it's perfect. Identify for me, find me a regex that perfectly identifies a driver's license number. I can wait. I mean, I'll die before you find one that's perfect. Regex is very seldom perfect in doing anything. Even if we had a database that had a list of every possible first name we could come up with, would anyone have searched for A, B, C, D, E, F? I don't know if you've seen the news about Southwest making fun of a passenger whose first name was A, B, C, D, E, F. So regex is seldom perfect. In the case that the regex isn't perfect, and the failure of the regex causes something to slip by governance and compliance that shouldn't have, it's really, really easy. Why do we do it the way we do it? Because this is the best regex available according to this trusted source, and we review it every year. Now, that doesn't erase your liability, but it mitigates it. It doesn't remove your risk, but it reduces it. Because you took an intelligent, reasonable action, punitive damages go away. Punitive damages are a multiplier, 4 and 5x. It shows that you're doing an intelligent thing, or you absolutely failed to do the bare minimum required. So think about that when you're looking at the products and programs. How are you going to document it? If you're buying something off the shelf to solve a compliance or governance problem, have they defended it in court? It's the first question I always ask. No vendor liked that question. Not a single one. I hate to break it to you. No, we've never defended it in court. Why would we do that? Well, because it's compliance and governance, and at some point someone is going to be found out of compliance and get fined. And if they rely on you to do that, you've inherited some of that liability. Are you just going to push all that back on your customers? Because I don't think that's a company I really want to buy into. Or are you at least going to attempt to help them with the defense? And if so, what was your argument? What occurred? How do you defend it? Et cetera, et cetera. So, intelligent data platforms enable agility and governance, aligning the goals of IT and legal to better service the business by automating the process in a repeatable, audible, and reportable fashion, reducing risk and mitigating liability. Aligning IT and legal, reducing risk and mitigating liability. You're not going to align IT and legal without doing this, just for the record. And now we get to talk about the fun stuff. The European Commissioner for Justice flat out said their ambition is to set the global standard. This was possible because, well, most every piece of governance and compliance legislation is awful. It's too open to interpretation. The GDPR is specific. The goal of the GDPR is to make you a good data custodian and fine you if you are not. We should have already been good data custodians. We're entrusted with our customers' data that can have a hugely damaging impact on our customers. We should be a good data custodian. That doesn't even consider the damage that it could potentially have on our company and the reputation of our company. We should be good data custodians. GDPR is not unreasonable. It just expects that we're going to be a good data custodian. I promise you, if we'd even done a passable job at consent, the consent would have been a whole lot easier in GDPR. Wouldn't have even been an issue. Right? But they targeted the things that we specifically do really, really, really poorly. So even if you're not subject to GDPR, it is a good idea to read and understand GDPR, because tomorrow you might be. To enter into free trade agreements with the EU, countries must now commit to developing data privacy frameworks that afford consumers protections on par with GDPR. And Brazil's LGPD is a photocopy with a find and replace, as is everyone else's. Believe it or not, although they will insist they do not, Mexico actually does, and the biggest challenge the Mexican government is having right now is enforcing it. They have no idea how to enforce it. That will change. That will change. They are all getting better. And well, I find it interesting. The result of California will inspire New York and Texas. Once those three pass laws, the federal government will pass a law. That is the way this has traditionally worked since the founding of our country. The federal government tends not to lead legislation. They tend to follow legislation. Legislation is very complex, and they tend to follow. Right? So California has been a leader, and New York has been a leader, and Texas has been a leader in legislation. China actually will, but China's going to do it a very, very different way. You'll notice Russia is here as well. Russia is updating their privacy laws. Russia and China have a tremendously huge problem because of their people realize there's a world outside. Right? The people in China are getting tired of the Chinese government in the same way that the Russian people are getting tired of the Russian government. We're going to see massive political change here. We're already starting to see it. China will follow very shortly thereafter. It will be a very interesting world when that happens. It will be an extremely interesting world to see. And the Chinese government right now is in a panic trying to figure out how to retain power, like everyone in power does. Failure to comply with GDPR can result in fines of 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover. Those are the minimums. Also, please note, it's whichever's higher, and it's the parent company. If Hitachi Vantara violates the GDPR, it's Hitachi Limited that gets fined, not Hitachi Vantara. Anyone want to take a guess at why that's written that way? It's so Google couldn't create a holding company. It's so Facebook couldn't create a holding company. And what they expected was, without this, they would simply create a holding company, move all their data outsourced to the holding company, and when it all goes sideways, just BK the holding company. Even at the $20 million fine, just BK the holding company. They can't BK the holding company. It's the parent company that gets fined. It's 4% of annual revenues for the holding company. I don't ever want to have that conversation. Right? I don't ever want my name to be the first time Japan hears my name is because I'm on a GDPR complaint. I don't know that you mean because Britain's leaving the EU or for some other reason? Yeah. Because Britain's agreed to follow the GDPR until 2026 and then adopt their own, while they write their own and adopt their own version. The damage to Facebook has the potential to be huge. My concern there as a citizen, my concern there is that unfortunately the British court, unlike most of the rest of the European court, tends to follow the American courts, and we didn't even give them a slap on the hand, to be honest. We have been notoriously weak there. I mean, Equifax is stronger than they ever were, and the result of the Equifax breach, which is the most damaging thing that's ever happened to any human being on the planet outside of being outright killed, is they received, I think, a $100 million contract from the US government. They received money. I don't know how that works. It's good business if you can get in it, I guess. Has anyone heard of the mosaic effect? We all know the 3 V's. The mosaic effect says even things that are not considered PII, personally identifiable information, like your zip code, your gender, and your age. If I take those pieces of data, I put them together, I have an 87% chance of identifying a specific person based on those 3 pieces of information. So when we look at compliance, we often talk about anonymizing data for big data purposes. The mosaic effect still applies. And GDPR specifically calls out the mosaic effect, as does everything that photocopies it. Please note, GDPR is becoming Tupperware. right? We don't say resealable plastic containers. We don't call them resealable bags. We call them Ziplocs. We call it saran wrap, not plastic wrap. GDPR is the same for purposes of this conversation. It specifically calls out the mosaic effect. Anonymization does not work. And the exponential growth of the 3 Vs make traditional protection, make traditional methodology a nightmare. Right? We haven't even turned on IoT yet. How are you going to protect that data? Technology moves to a decentralized process. This isn't new to any of us. We want to put the right application in the right place to service the business the right way. That's the promise of cloud. The initial promise was lower cost. But the real promise is the agility to put the application where it's supposed to be. Analytics and AI is decentralized for the same reason I define big data, right? IoT and blockchain are decentralized as an engineering architected design. Blockchain has to be decentralized. IoT has to be decentralized. The only way we're going to get the value is to move the processing as close as we can to the edge. The data is entirely too voluminous. Legal, on the other hand, legal wants everything centralized, right? They're not interested in decentralization. So what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to do both. We need to add centralized compliance for a decentralized process. So you notice a new logo here on this slide. What big privacy is, and Hitachi is unique. We're the only ones that have this. This is a small company that was created by legal technologists, people with law degrees and computer science degrees together. Specifically what this does is it's called pseudonymization. And what pseudonymization is it takes every single individualized record of a person and it turns them into a fictional human being. If we think about big data, and it's specifically for big data, the other use is big data. And if we think about big data, does big data care about you? Of course not, right? It cares about 1 million people, some percentage of which are like you in some way. It doesn't look at me. It doesn't say, I need people that were born on September 22nd in 1976. That would be a terrible big data result. No, it's looking for people that are of a certain age range, of a certain income range, of a certain demographic range, to try to find out, are they more or less likely to be a buyer of whatever it is I'm selling? And it doesn't matter what the question is. We're always selling something. Are they more likely or less likely to suffer side effects from this drug? Are they more likely or less likely to use us to invest? Are they more or less risk adverse? Well, it doesn't do that by identifying us individually. It does that by identifying us in huge groups. That's the only way it works. So what this does specifically is it takes me and it converts me to a fictionalized person that is between the ages of such and such, that lives in such and such an area, that is of such and such range on age, obviously not sex, zip code, earning potential, whether I'm married or not. And the mosaic effect no longer applies because I have no specific age. I'm part of an age range. I have no specific earning. I have no specific debt. I have no specific mortgage value. I fall into a range. All of a sudden, that data is now fictionalized. Has exactly the same value for big data analytics because I'm automatically putting them in the buckets that they belong into anyways. But the data analysts can never see the originating data. They just see the bucket. So that qualifies for GDPR. I don't need consent to do that. I don't need consent. It's fictionalized data. Fictionalized human beings. I don't need consent. It also covers HIPAA. No PII there. It covers every other form of compliance and governance until the point at which some legislation says you can no longer use data for any analytical purpose. Outside of that, we're covered. And we're the only company to offer this. Sorry, I apologize. I just realized this is now the second time I've mentioned a product. That means I get a bonus for today, just for the record. It's now twice. I've beat my quota. When we look at data and data management, we really need to start thinking about adding some intelligence. For the history of what we've done, we've stored files. That's not likely to change, but we need to start thinking about them in a different way. Just like I said, no more products, right? We need to start thinking about it a different way. We need to start thinking about objects, not just files. And the main reason for that is an object store stores files as a metadata record and blob object. The file is still retained, it's stored in the blob, but all of our research has shown the most valuable piece of the data is actually contained within the metadata. Anyone use NICE? Anyone familiar with NICE, call center app? Does all your call center voice recordings? The audio file is not the important part. The caller ID is far more important. The agent that took the call, the duration of the call, the time of the call, the date of the call, that's the important pieces. How do you find that in a traditional file system? You throw it in a database, right? Cool. Well, why don't we just make that part of the file system? And then we give you the ability to store the metadata, right? The key value pair, the creation date, the owner, the last access. We're used to this, right? Right-click on any file, select properties. We've all done this a million times, right? Anyone ever tried to do a directory on a folder that has 100,000 objects in it, 100,000 files in it on a traditional file system? It takes about 16 minutes. I tested many. It takes about 16 minutes. Do you know what happens if you do a dir 4,000 times? Whatever NAS you have just breaks, falls over. It's fantastic. Don't ever do it. It takes a tremendous amount of memory. Like, it's a really inefficient process. But oftentimes that's the important stuff. I'm looking for a file. I'm looking for files created between this date and this date. I'm looking for files created between this date and this date by this person. Well, that's just a query, database query on an object store. Now, if I can do that with all the traditional metadata, what custom metadata can I add? How about the source application? How about I add some data lineage directly to the file itself, to the record of the file, so it's not separate. I don't have to maintain a separate system to track my data lineage. It's now part of my object store. It's part of the object. How about if I add whether it's privileged and what compliance policies apply to it? Then it doesn't matter. As the rules changed, I simply read the custom metadata, apply a new policy, move on. Problem solved. Geocoordinates, maybe the URL. How about I add the consent right to the file? What is the consent that applies to this file? And then maybe, how did I capture it? How about I make my files themselves self-identifying? If the life cycle of data outlives the life cycle of an application, if I'm using an application to do this, at some point it's going to be a different application. Why don't I just change that? Why don't I stop buying silos, make my data self-identifying, make my data more intelligent, and then a lot of those things that I have to maintain probably could just go away, because all I have to do is display a dashboard with a result of a query. It'd be a whole lot easier. And then I can also report to legal by just giving them the output of a query. Immutability. Does everyone understand the concept of immutability as just a general term? Immutable. It cannot be changed. When you're dealing with surveillance video, so when you're looking at surveillance video in law enforcement, camcorder video kind of sucks. There's no immutability in camcorder video. The reason IP video systems started catching on really quick is because we could add encryption. And it was neat. If you attempted to edit the file, the video between the two keyframes turned purple. It was obvious that it was edited, right? Becomes self-testifying almost. I don't have to testify that it's original. I have to testify to the technology, and then all of the video captured with that technology falls under the same testimony. It cannot be edited. It's immutable within the context of the keyframes. So, object store. Objects cannot change throughout their storage lifetime or the time between successful upload events. Changes to an object result in an append operation. It is a version file system. So step outside of compliance for a minute. Ransomware. Anybody been hit by ransomware? Because that's potentially a worse day than having to testify, although generally one does sometimes lead to the other. If my file system is immutable and every change just creates a new file version, I haven't really lost anything. And then it's really just a question of how fast can I respond, how fast can I stop the writes, and how fast can I restore the previous version. And this is significantly faster than running backup from tape, running a restore from tape operation. Additionally, I can actually give this to my user, this control. Immutability is fantastic. It also means I have an evidentiary record. It's immutable. By its foundation, it's immutable. Immutable is also really key to understanding blockchain. Everyone understands the blockchain is immutable, and it is in fact a chain, and anything you have to change in one piece violates the whole chain, invalidates the whole chain. So I can store any data within blockchain. Everyone understand that conceptually. I can put nearly any data inside blockchain. I could put a video inside a blockchain if I so desire. I can also put a name, an address, a phone number, a social security number, a contract ID, a customer number. So some of that sort of sounded like PII. So what happens if I do that and the encryption's broken? And now I'm no longer allowed to use AES-1. Well, my whole blockchain is now invalidated. I have to destroy the whole blockchain. The entire chain would have to go away. Please, 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 if you're doing a blockchain project, don't put PII in the chain. You will, I promise you, at some point, you will run into a situation where the entire chain has to become invalidated because some piece of PII is now visible. How do you do a right to be forgotten if PII is in the chain? It starts to become really, really complicated. So just don't do it. Just don't do it. Use an internal, unique record ID that refers to something that's third party, that contains the PII, that can be encrypted and managed like you do the rest of your applications. And if in a right to be forgotten, you simply replace it with right to be forgotten order number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't have to replace anything in the blockchain. I just replace the record in that linked database. Does that make sense? Please don't make that mistake. Please. Or do. It's no problem. I'm happy to come in and consult where you made the mistake. But since you just got this for free, don't pay me later to do it. Matter of fact, if you were to pay me later, knowing that you're in this room, I'm going to come in with a film crew so I can catch the reaction on your face. I can get at least 1,000 hits. I mean, come on. There's 1,000 IT guys that would love to see that look. Unstructured data. We know what unstructured data is, right? Human and machine generated data. We are the creators of unstructured data. Structured data. We know what structured data is. Data that appears in a database. It has a very defined format. It's highly organized data based on a schema. This is the most important part. That's what makes structured data. And when we look at IoT, that's what we get. We get semi-structured data. Semi-structured data has some portion of the data that's based on a schema, and then generally has some sort of other area, right? XML, JSONs, right? Here's the structure, and here's the payload. That's semi-structured data. Structured data, we don't need to put that in an object store. We can already search that. We can already access that. We can put it in an object store. We could talk about that offline. Semi-structured data and unstructured data is where an object store really creates value. Tremendous amounts of value, because that is the data that's hard to manage. That's the data that's hard to govern. That's the data that's hard to flip and find. And if I'm able to build a system where I'm taking all my structured data and I'm putting it in essentially a database that I can then search and take action on, think about all the things that you can do. Think about all the applications you currently have that you can ensure the data has a place to live outside of just the application. But also think about value you could turn around and bring to your customers. First off, your users could now have a search interface for their data, which would probably help, right? That's easy. You build an index based on the owner, the data owner, and show them all the files they own. And they can do whatever they want with it, right? But I can also do somewhat interesting things, like define patterns to things. Like if I've got a projects folder, because I've got a team that works on construction, right? They build buildings, they build projects. I can also start looking for maybe matches. Like here's my customer list. Here's the folders that match them. Oh crap! I just saved the file in the wrong place. Help me find it. I don't know how to find it. I think we've all run into that. You could alert on things like that. There's all kinds of interesting things you can do to bring value back to your customers that show that you're thinking about them, thinking about their problems, and thinking about the business. And it doesn't have to be a perfect answer to a question. What it has to be is a change in how they see IT, a change in how they see the value we provide, so they start asking the question, hey, it'd be really neat if we could do this. Remember we talked about that, how hard that is to do organically. Think of ways to do that. And then this super important, super valuable, being able to address storage with an API. Things are able to read and write S3. It's become core functionality. When we're looking at applications, we want things that can read and write S3. Being able to read and write this is hugely important. I don't want to do things in a GUI. I don't want to do things by clicking. I want to automate, which means I need to be able to write to it with a program. I need to be able to address it programmatically. And that's everything from I need to be able to administer it programmatically to I need to be able to manage the files programmatically, even from a third party. Metadata, your data becomes self-identifying. Automate your data quality, transformation, and management. Enforce your privacy in one location. And allow it to change as governance changes. Too many of our HIPAA applications, cool, that's HIPAA. But I also have Sarbanes-Oxley, I'm going to have GDPR, right? I may have 40 different levels of regulation that are required. And then geolocated replicas ensure the data is online and available. And if I address it using an API, then if I lose a site, if I lose a node, I can still get to that data. I don't have to file a data loss event. So these are the steps to cleaning up your data, right? When we're designing any system for data quality management, these are the big steps. Theoretically, that's why we're all here. Maybe not the rest of what I talked about, but if we're talking about quality data management, centralize, classify, and categorize your data. Profile the data, do some pattern matching, normalize the data, and aggregate it, right? Hadoop is a fantastic tool that's supposed to allow us to create these wonderful, pristine data lakes. Most of what I see are data swamps. Most of what I see are, they just became the new place to throw all the crap. We didn't do a good job of cleaning and normalizing the data before we put it there, and it just created a data swamp. So that's why step 1, normalize and aggregate your data. Step 2, security and risk mitigation. Secure your data, encrypt it, and shred it when it expires. Legal loves this. Remember how I said if legal's not aware of it and a policy says to kill it and you kill it and later it's found that there's some libelous data within there, that's not evidence anymore, you didn't destroy data. If you shred it, it can't be recovered because the very first thing they're going to do is they're going to call someone like me who works in legal services, who does really difficult data recovery and say, hey, we need you to recover that data. Sorry, that's a shredded file system, we're not getting that back. Protect it and preserve it. Use granular policies. GDPR requires that no one have access to more data than they are required to do their job, which means even after I synonymize the data, I run my data analytics, and I say this is my buying center for this product. If I give you a list of customers and say call only the customers marked in red, because those are my buyers, I've violated GDPR. I can only give you the list of customers you are specifically required to call because those are the ones that are your buyers. Does that make logical sense? Right? I can't give you more data than you are required to have to do your job. That violates GDPR. So it is really important that the policies are granular. Right? It also means I don't want to retain junk. So let's get rid of the junk. Everyone in the room has an enforced email retention policy? Yeah? Hey, you know, by law in the United States, you're required to have an email retention policy and enforce the email retention policy. It can be any policy. It can be we keep everything forever. It can be we keep everything for 90 days, but you must have a documented policy and enforce it. I was involved in a case where they did not have an enforced policy. They lost one file. That one file, when the judge excused the jury, the instructions given to the jury was, there is a file missing. It contains 47 seconds of security data. You are to assume anything that could have happened during that 47 seconds did. They get $1 million a second. Policies must be in place and they must be enforced. Failing to enforce a policy means any data that could have existed must exist. If your policy says we retain all email for 1 year, and I'm able to find an email from 1 year and 2 months ago, you must also have all email back 7, 10, 20, 30 years as long as email has existed. That's based on long-standing legal requirements. Enron, we could talk about Enron. Enron actually created the e-discovery market. It did not exist before Enron. There were 47 different e-discovery companies involved in the Enron case because no one was big enough to handle the volume of data. And we now use the totality of that data to test e-discovery systems because it is tiny and I can test it all on my laptop. And yet when it was done, no single company could handle all of the data. If that gives you any indication of how the volume of what we're dealing with has changed in the real world. It's not even table stakes. It's so less than table stakes. And then data accessibility. Data must be available where and when it is needed. So we talked about this already. I'm not going to go through it again. I asked for customer use cases. I really like customer use cases. I think they help. My first slide, I talked about being CIO of a legal services company. They sent me this. In the 160 use cases, they sent me my use case, which I thought was hilarious. My quote, my usage. So I hope my talk has helped with this. I hope my talk has given you some of the skills necessary to remove some of the antagonism between IT and legal. Right? They are your most loyal buyer. If you can get them to do the thing you want to do anyways and be on your side, you will be far more successful. So I hope you found that helpful. And legal's always late, right? So go to legal first. right? Don't wait until they found out about the product because you're at version 2.7 and they've just now heard about it and they're going to shut the whole project down. Be proactive. Make them your partner and you will win. So I love this picture. I don't know if anybody noticed my opening slide. There's these beautiful rolling hills at a sunset. There was a little ocean or a huge lake in the background. Anyone notice that? There were 3 windmills. Anyone in the room know that, aside from the Hitachi employees, know that Hitachi makes windmills? I get so tired of like the data center picture that people put up, or the city. Like, we don't make cities, and everybody's seen a data center. We're at one, right? I like this picture because I can see myself in a boat, right, sitting right here. No cell service, right? Reading a book or fishing, something quiet and peaceful. Did you know Hitachi makes dams? The most important thing about us as a company, and the thing that I love about Hitachi as a company, is every single one of our products was created to solve the operational problem of one of our 800 plus sister companies. None of our products are the result of a marketing slide. None of our products are the result of a marketing exercise. Every single one of them solved a problem in banking, in manufacturing, in healthcare. We have 5 hospitals. We run our own banks. Our 800 sister companies are just like your companies, right? How many of our competitors have the ability to say that? So thank you for your time. I know I went way over, but I really appreciate it.